Hello and welcome to Fast Forward. I'm Peter Drekmeier, and today's program is going to focus on the 2004 presidential election, and specifically some of the irregularities that have led to concerns over the validity of the election. We've got three great panelists tonight. I'd like to welcome Emily Levy. She's the project coordinator for Dr. Richard Hayes Phillips and his analysis of the Ohio election anomalies. Second, we have Cheryl Lilienstein. She's a member of the steering committee of the Dean Democratic Club of Silicon Valley and Physicians for a Democratic Majority, and she spent some time in Florida during the election. And then we have Katherine Forrest. She's Director of Operations and co-founder of the Commonweal Institute, which is a think tank located here in Palo Alto and Menlo Park. And she's also been involved with the Votergate election documentaries, and we'll see some more about that in the program. So I just want to start off a little bit with some background. Here in the United States, we take a lot of pride in our democracy, and we don't really think much about the way it works until Florida in 2000. And there we had a lot of problems, and it got people thinking about the election procedures here in the United States. So why don't we just start talking a little bit about what happened in 2000 and what came out of some of those problems. Anyone like to start with that?
Well, I'd like to start with the understanding that most people in the United States, including most of us here at this table, really had no idea until 2000 happened that there was something wrong with our election system. And even now, when we talk to people that we know, no one seems to know how it works. And this is a pretty big problem in a democracy where you're expecting to have a valid result from an election. So, I mean, we went through 2000. We know now that if all the votes had been counted accurately in 2000, that Gore would have won that election, and yet the Bush administration says, we won the election, and they're saying in this election, we won the election. And we still don't know who really won this election because all the votes aren't counted. We can't really know who won the election, and yet the assumption is Bush won the election.
Yeah. So in 2000, we heard a lot about butterfly ballots and hanging chads, and as a result, there was the Help America Vote Act.
Well, yeah, I mean, Help America Vote was designed, a large part of it was to address the problems that had become very visible and very public in that 2000 election. And there not only was an encouragement to modernize the kind of voting equipment that was being used, but also a whole bundle of money attached to it. And what ended up happening is many of the states sort of felt, okay, we have to do something quick. We have those old punch card machines. We have to upgrade. And so they rushed out and bought electronic voting machines before people really understood what some of the downsides of that equipment were. So we've been struggling with it ever since.
Well, let's talk about that, because electronic voting machines were supposedly a solution to problems in 2000. But I know I personally have been hearing about potential problems with electronic voting machines for over a year now. And I think there was legislation introduced by Congressman Rush Holt to require a paper trail.
Right.
Now, what's the paper trail all about? Why is that necessary?
Okay, well, if you think about an electronic voting machine, it's like a computer. And you can think about your ATM at the bank. You go there, you can touch the screen, it records things, you see it there, and you're depositing your money, and then you get a receipt out of it. In the case of a voting machine, you interact with a touch screen kind of apparatus there to cast your vote. And you don't know what happens to it. I mean, it sort of says, yes, you voted, but you have no idea how it's actually recorded inside the machine. So the idea with the voter verified, it's not just a paper trail, it's a paper ballot, that the machine would print something out that actually gets out separate from the machine, is kept underneath glass so that you can't go and sort of take it away and go outside and sell your vote, say, see, I voted for so-and-so, now give me 25 bucks. So it's kept there inside the place, but stored separately from the machine, and that would be the official document that records how you voted.
So this is the ideal that you would like, but it's not what's in existence today in most places.
No, what's in existence today is you interact with the machine.
And then your vote disappears.
And your vote disappears. And you have no idea what happened.
Right.
And who do we have to trust to count this? Is it who actually tallies these votes?
It's a really good question. Does anybody in the listening audience know who is tallying the votes? Does anybody know where the votes are going? Do you know?
Well, I know that there are very few companies that are producing these electronic voting machines. They're companies that have very strong ties to the Republican Party. And in fact, it's the CEO of Diebold announced that he would be delivering the state of Ohio to President Bush well before the election.
Well, and added on top of that, I mean, you have the three big companies are Diebold, Election Systems and Software, and Sequoia are the three biggest. And Walden Odell is at Diebold. The chief of their election division is a man named Bob Urosevich. His brother, Todd, is the chief executive at Election Systems and Software. So, I mean, these are like brothers together. And then the third company, which is Sequoia, their top management was involved in some huge scandals, having, with corruption and mob money and things like this. I mean, you have some very questionable backgrounds on the people and the operations that are involved in making the equipment.
Well, it seems like there must be some government oversight of these companies. I mean, are you telling me that these are private companies that are working closely with Republicans that oversee our votes and there's no paper trail to do a recount?
And they say that their software is proprietary, so nobody can see the software in the machines. There was an illicit copy that got discovered. It was actually out on the internet, and Bev Harris, who's one of the voting machine activists, discovered this, put this stuff out all over the place, and then people began to analyze it and find out how many flaws and bugs there were in the software. Are you familiar with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, first of all, these voting machine companies have not wanted anyone to examine what the software is. And they've resisted, examination, saying, well, we have a company to run. We have proprietary software. This is ours, and we're not letting anybody investigate. And this, I mean, to me, the public should be irate about this. This is our election. This is a public domain issue. This is not about who owns our votes, which is what it's come down to, really, is when you put your vote into a voting machine where nobody knows where the votes are going, someone has the information, and we don't.
Well, it's a question of trust me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they're saying, is just trust me. Everything will be fine. And the reality is it isn't. Even when you look at the system, the Independent Testing Authority, they're always claiming, oh, these machines are all checked by the Independent Testing Authority. There are three companies who do that. They refused to tell anybody what they do in their testing. They refuse to tell what the results are, whether they found any problems with the equipment. And the machine manufacturers pay the independent testing authorities.
Wow.
For what they're doing. I mean, it's like we've outsourced our democracy.
Well, let's get to the 2004 election. Okay, it's my understanding about a third of the votes were counted on electronic voting machines. Was that a problem? Do we know? Is there any way to tell?
Yes, it was a massive problem in a number of different states, and I think each of us know more about different ones. In Ohio, which is the state that I know most about, not only were there electronic voting machines, but even the people who voted by punch card ballots had their votes counted by electronic machines, which
Those are the optical scan
they're
machines,
the optical scan and the punch card. They're
And
two
punch card.
different systems, and I believe they were both counted by electronic machines, and there were problems with the counting of the votes, even when the votes weren't cast on electronic machines. And the problems were massive. The problems were enough that they really call into question the veracity of the declaration that Bush won Ohio, and with the popular vote that he was declared to have won in Ohio, he got Ohio's 20 electoral votes, and had those votes gone to Kerry, Kerry would have carried the election. So Ohio is really a key state.
So what do you mean the problems were massive? What kind of problems were they?
Well, the project that I'm involved with with Dr. Richard Hayes Phillips, who's a statistician, has been county by county, going through every precinct in each county, beginning with the most populous counties. And we've now done about 15 counties, accounting for 62% of the registered voters in Ohio. And Dr. Phillips's most conservative estimate is that Bush's victory over Kerry was inflated by 101,000 votes. Now, Bush is announced to have won by about 118,000 votes. So by our most conservative estimate, it was really only about 17,000 votes that he won by. And that's not counting all the people who were disenfranchised, which we'll get to in a moment, who weren't allowed to cast votes.
Okay. I want to get back to this. First, we have a clip that we want to show. And this is from a documentary that, Kate, I believe you're involved with, called Votergate TV, votergate.tv.
Right.
And people can view it online, I believe, the whole half-hour documentary. Let's take a look at that now, and we'll get back to some of the Ohio problems.
Okay, so this is where the warehouse was. They have now moved it since my election. It was back here in these buildings. And this is where I came the day that the warehouses are open to the candidates to inspect. So I came here with an old college buddy, and he is now he's a TV producer, and he grabbed his camera. We walked in, and I asked them to show me how the machine worked. They pressed a button, and out came a tape. And the tape had the names of the candidates with a total. And I said, well, that's nice. I got that on election night, but how do I know? Where do you have like a mark or something that shows each tally of each vote? How do we go back and tally and count the votes? And they said, well, you pretty much can't. And that is when I said, oh my goodness, this is terrible. We can't count our votes. So how do we know this is right? So I just started fooling around with the machine. And it's when I pushed my name, I pressed the button next to my name, and then I look down and I see Mr. Gambaluka's name in the display when I press Susan Bernecker.
Shall we do it again?
Do it again.
Yeah. Okay, here we go again. I'm pressing Bernecker. Gambaluka shows up.
So we went down the row. We probably tested 15 machines, and I said, you know what, we don't have to test anymore.
Again, I'm pressing Bernecker. I got Gambaluka.
How easy is it to rig an election where you have a situation in a voting machine that you can't prove the votes?
One way of looking at the worst thing that could happen with an election is it could actually just be stolen.
Wow. That's really something. I believe that took place in Louisiana, and people tried to vote for this woman who was running for office, and the machine...
Who was a Republican.
She was a Republican,
Yeah.
even. Okay, so it wasn't biased, and the machine recorded her vote going to her opponent. Did anything like that happen in Ohio?
It happened in Ohio, it happened in Florida, it happened in New Mexico. Did it happen in other states that either of you know of?
I think Pennsylvania. I think, yeah.
Wow.
In Ohio, in Mahoning,
Texas.
In Mahoning County, Ohio, the evidence seems quite clear that the electronic voting machines, at least some of them, were programmed to default to Bush. So what that means is if someone didn't vote for president, their vote went to Bush.
If they left it blank.
If they left it blank, it went to Bush. If they tried to vote for someone else and had a problem like we just saw in that film clip, their vote went to Bush. And when they were able to see that happening, and there were, according to the Board of Elections in Mahoning County, 20 to 30 voting machines where the votes visibly jumped from one candidate to another, and I haven't heard of reports of it being anything but jumping from Kerry to Bush.
So they're all in Bush's favor.
Yeah.
Everything I've heard of.
Yeah.
There may have been other incidents that I haven't heard of. But I don't believe so because of what I think happened. Those 20 to 30 machines are probably not the only machines where the votes were jumping. Those are the ones where the default didn't work correctly. Because when it works correctly, the voter has no idea that it's going on. Those are the machines that were malfunctioning in the way that they were programmed to function.
That happened that was a similar story in Texas too, where people were trying to vote for Kerry and it would flip to Bush. And so they were seeing that happening there.
And the same thing happened in Florida. People were pushing the button for Kerry and it was showing up Bush, and they called up the election protection people and said, these machines, they're doing it again. They're stealing our vote again.
Yeah.
Well, now what seems really suspicious to me is the exit polls. Now, normally exit polls are a great way to measure how people voted. You know exactly who voted, and they can tell you exactly who they voted for. And I know that in a lot of other countries, we use exit polls to determine the validity of an election. Ukraine is an
Like
example.
Ukraine, right.
Which happened, it was very interesting, it happened right around the same time. And the United States said that election was fraud because the exit polls did not match the final tally.
Yeah.
Now, what happened with the exit polls this time?
Well, I want to say something about exit polls because there's been a big kerfuffle about it. And one of the things that we've been trained to think is that our exit polls are illegitimate because it's a poll. And a lot of us, before the election, participated in something on the internet that says, oh, go vote. So you go to this poll or you go to that poll. And so, of course, these are really random and illegitimate polls. But an exit poll provides information which is legitimate in a court of law. I mean, the Mitofsky polls that are used as the exit polls in the United States have been used for the last 25 years to decide the fraudulence or lack of fraudulence in elections. And the reason why it is valid is because they take actual voters who have voted coming out of a voting booth and ask them how they voted. And these are considered to be extraordinarily accurate tools. Extraordinarily accurate tools.
Now, the figures I have are the swing in Ohio was 6.7%. That's unheard of. I mean, 1% would be quite a bit.
Will you explain what you mean by the swing? 'Cause not
From
everyone
the
understands.
exit poll to what the official final tally was. So, for example, in Ohio, it looked like Kerry was going to win by 4.2%, and he lost by 2.5%. Okay, that's a huge swing. The swing in Pennsylvania was 6.5, and in Florida was 4.9%.
Well, not only that, but my understanding is that they were getting results on the polls as they were going along, and then all of a sudden it's like the operation that was doing the exit polling revised its figures then to start matching as what the tallies were, and I've even seen allegations that some of the media were hooked up to some of the central processing equipment and being able to watch what the tallies were as they were coming in. Well, that brings up a question about how do you tally, how do you know at a state level how people vote in every precinct? Because in each precinct you may have 8 or 10 machines, something like that. Well, the results from those at the end of the day are supposed to be pooled together for the county level, where there's other machines, again, computers, that add all those up and tally it and say so many for candidate A, so many for candidate B, so many for this ballot measure and stuff. And then those in turn go to the state level to be added for all the counties in the state. And so you do have electronic machines doing a whole lot of your adding up when you get up to the level of the county and the level of states.
Okay, we have another clip we want to show here, and then I want to get right back to this because I think the exit polls are really interesting and very revealing. So let's go to the other clip.
What was going on with the tracking?
Now, the central tabulator is sort of the one machine to rule them all. It collects all the votes. And every company, not just Diebold, has this central tabulator. Because, of course, the way you vote is you vote in individual precincts. They're scattered around. And there has to be one machine to pull all these threads together, add them all up, and pronounce the winner.
Bev was invited to New York to meet former presidential candidate Howard Dean.
Bev sat me down, and in a few short seconds, I was amazed at what I could do. All right, Bev, show me how to do this.
Well, what we have here is the central tabulator computer. Now, in a voting system, you have all these different voting machines at all the different polling places. Sometimes, as in a county like mine, there's 1,000 polling places in one county. All those machines feed into the one machine so it can add up all the votes. So, of course, if you were going to do something you shouldn't to a voting machine, would it be more convenient to do it to the 4,000 machines or to just come in here to one machine and deal with all of them at once? What surprises people is the central tabulator is just a PC. It's like you and I use. It uses Windows. It's just a regular computer.
So anybody who can hack into a PC can hack into the central tabulator.
The GEMS program is the program that is the central tabulator program. And I'm going to put in a password here. Okay, we're in now. This is the official program that the county supervisor sees.
Is this the Diebold program?
Yes, this is a Diebold central tabulation program.
Okay.
And then go to election summary report. And it's going to whir and spin for a minute while it adds up all the votes from all the different precincts. And as we can see here, Howard Dean has 1,000 votes. And Lex Luthor has 500, so you're beating Lex Luthor, and we're
2-1.
Yes, and Tiger Woods, unfortunately, doesn't have any votes yet.
All right.
All right, let's close this out. I was just showing you the legitimate way to go in and look at votes, which, of course, you can't tamper with. Go to the Start menu, and I'm going to show you something tricky. And I want you to go to My Computer and just click that. And you're going to see go to Local Disk C. Go to GEMS, which is the name of the Diebold program. We're going to go to Local DB, which stands for Local Database. That's where they keep the votes. And by the way, this has been out on the internet for ages now. Go to Central Tabulator Votes, which is the database we just looked at. And then go to the sum of the candidates, which is that table. You see we have 800 votes here for you and 400 for Lex Luthor. Let's just flip those. We'll make that 400. And we'll give 100 votes to Tiger. Let's just see what happened here. We'll go back into GEMS the legitimate way. You're the county supervisor. You're checking on the progress of your election. And as you can see now, Howard Dean only has 500 votes. Lex Luthor has 900 and Tiger Woods has 100 votes. We just edited an election. It took us 90 seconds.
But human beings.
Okay, interesting. That might account for some of the discrepancy between the exit polls and the final counts. Of course, we have no way of checking because there's no way to do a recount with electronic voting. But my understanding is there were a lot of other problems in the election. And let's talk about some of those. What else happened?
Well, one of the most intense focuses of this election was Ohio because Kenneth Blackwell was the head of the Bush-Cheney. He's the Secretary of State for the state of Ohio, and he was the head of the Bush-Cheney campaign.
He was this year's Katherine Harris.
Right, this year's Katherine Harris. And there were just thousands of complaints of long lines in minority precincts, voter suppression happening all over Ohio. There had been huge numbers of people who were registered in Ohio, both Republicans and Democrats, but the difficulties all seemed to be happening in the Democratic precincts where there weren't enough voting machines. The voting machines that were there often malfunctioned, and people simply couldn't get to vote. I mean, they were standing in the rain and in the cold in very long lines for hours and hours. And we have no idea how many people didn't vote because they just didn't have the time to do that. Whereas in the Republican suburban areas, there seemed to be no problem with voting. Everything went smoothly, as we have been told.
It's fascinating that it's not even like necessarily an organized conspiracy, but you had the feeling that at some level in Ohio, people were told, you know who you want to have win. You want Bush to win. There are so many things that could go wrong. I mean, if there weren't enough machines or if something happened, I mean, the paper was not the right weight when they went to send in their voter registration forms, or if something went wrong with the counting. Gee, all sorts of things could happen. And you don't have to say beyond that. And because you saw this creativity, what are all the things that we found there?
Different
Emily?
sorts of things happened in different places. There were reports on the Election Protection Coalition's election incident reporting system of voters being given punch card ballots with the hole for Bush already punched.
Wow.
So what that means is if they chose to vote for another candidate, then there would be 2 holes punched and their vote would be classified as an overvote and disqualified, not counted. But if they voted for Bush, the vote would go through because there would still only be one hole punched. There were, in terms of the voter suppression, there are reports that there were phone calls made and notices put up in African American and other minority and heavily Democratic areas informing people that Republicans were to vote on Tuesday and Democrats were to vote on Wednesday.
Wow.
So people showed up at the polls and found out that they were a day late. And the long lines were caused by insufficient voting machines being given to polling places in Kerry's stronghold areas, chiefly in African American neighborhoods. And people waited in lines as long as 10 and 11 hours. So if they had a sick relative, or if they were themselves ill or disabled, or if they had a job or school or childcare responsibilities or anything else like that, they might not have been able to wait. And many, many, many people were turned away. We don't have exact numbers of who left without voting. Then sometimes people waited all that time and got to the front of the line, and perhaps there were 2 precincts in their polling place and they were in line at the wrong precinct. Maybe they were given, in some cases they were given a provisional ballot. In some cases they were told they had to go across the room and stand in another line that was many hours long. And those provisional ballots, many of them weren't counted. In Ohio, there are still, to this day, 92,672 uncounted regular ballots. That doesn't even count the provisional ballots, ballots that simply have not been counted.
Why weren't they counted?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Isn't there a law? I mean, are there laws in Ohio that say that ballots are supposed to be counted and that anybody is responsible for making sure that happens?
It's a good question, and I don't
Seems
know
like
the
there
answer.
should be a law that the Secretary of State cannot be partisan and be co-chair of one of the presidential candidates' campaigns. I mean, there's no uniform code across the country, is there?
There's not.
That just seems
Elections are conducted differently from county to county and from state to state all over the country.
So even in one state, you have all sorts of different systems and different policies within those jurisdictions.
Exactly. There are counties where if someone went to vote, delivered their absentee ballot to the wrong precinct, or they weren't allowed to vote. Or if somebody showed up at the wrong precinct, they were allowed to vote provisional ballots in some cases. In other cases, they were told you have to go to the right precinct to vote a provisional ballot if your name's not on the voter rolls. There were people who had lived in the same house 44 years who were told they were no longer on the voter rolls. It really was sort of a different thing in each county. Another problem that happened is that Ohio has a law that says that the ballot position of each candidate's name is rotated so that the same candidate who's first in alphabetical order doesn't benefit from voters who just check the top name no matter who it is. Apparently there's enough of that happening that they had to create a law for it, but they actually had in the same polling place different ballot orders in different precincts within that polling place. And whether intentionally or unintentionally, voters were in many cases given a ballot that was for a different machine from the one they were directed to vote on.
You know, this is also confusing that I'm not even following it, and I've been following it. So imagine what it's like for voters going in trying to figure out this machine, that machine, or even people working in those places trying to do a good job, which we assume that most everybody is trying to do a good job. If the system is chaotic and uneven and nobody quite knows what the regulations are, and I have to learn a different set of rules today than I had to use last week, how can we expect to have, any confidence in the outcome? This is just, it is nuts.
Well, and there's no national, it's not in our Constitution that we have a right to vote. We don't have much in the way of national laws.
I just found that out last Thursday.
Yeah, we don't have much in the way of national laws that pertain to voting or elections. And it's left to the states, and then the states, as you said, devolve it to the counties. There is so little oversight in this thing. There's such inconsistency that is going to be a major challenge for America. If we care about our democracy, we better get going and pay attention to what's going on with elections and start coordinating our activities so that we begin to have a more uniform system.
Right.
And consequences for messing it up.
Right.
Well, a lot happened in many states, and we're really focusing on Ohio because those 20 electoral votes could have swung the election from Bush to Kerry. What was the follow-up from people who were concerned about the problems in Ohio?
Well, there have been a few things happening. Congressman John Conyers from Michigan launched an investigation which is ongoing. He's issued a 100-plus page report that's available online about voting irregularities in Ohio. And through his investigation and involvement of the Congressional Black Caucus last week on January 6th, when the electoral votes came up in Congress for certification, Congresswoman Stephanie Tubbs Jones of Ohio challenged the certification of the Ohio electoral vote, and she was joined by our Senator Barbara Boxer from California.
Hooray!
Yay, Barbara Boxer. Okay, I think we actually have a clip of that speech, so why don't we,
Great.
this would be a good time to go to that. So.
Advancing legislative initiatives is more challenging when you are in the minority party in the Congress. However, this challenge is multiplied when you are in the minority in the House of Representatives because of the House rules compared to the Senate rules. Voting irregularities were an issue after the 2000 presidential election when the House initiatives relating to election reform were not considered. Therefore, in order to prevent our voices from being kept silent, it is imperative that we object to the counting of Ohio's electoral votes. What happened in Ohio and Cuyahoga County? There are just over 1 million registered voters in Cuyahoga County, which of course includes my congressional district. Registration increased approximately 10%. The beauty of the 2004 election was that more people were fully prepared to exercise their right to vote. However, on election day, hundreds and even thousands of individuals went to the voting polls and were denied the opportunity. In my own county, where citizens...
It's amazing in this day and age that we still have these problems. But it's wonderful to have heroes like Stephanie Tubbs Jones, is that her name?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who's standing up, and Barbara Boxer, our own senator here from California. Now, there was also a recount in Ohio. Is that correct?
If you want to call it that, you would not be alone.
So there are problems. You're suggesting there are problems with the recount. What was supposed to happen?
The Ohio recount was supposed to be 3% of the ballots were supposed to be recounted in a random fashion.
3% in each county.
In each county,
And
right.
was this automatic, or?
No, I think we have to give credit where credit is due here. It was the Green Party and the Libertarian Party that actually requested the recount. And
paid for it.
Yeah, and paid for it. Yeah, they had to pay for it. And it's a good question. Why is it that the Democratic Party didn't step up to the plate here? And we can't answer that question. It's a big mystery. But this supposed 3% recount was accomplished in a bizarre manner. At least as I was looking at it, the people in charge of the elections in all of the counties found precincts whose number matched the 3% number, and that was their random sample.
So it really wasn't random at all?
Not at all. And they avoided any of the precincts that people had pointed to as that precinct has a difficulty, right?
Oh, you don't want to count where the problems may be because you may find them.
Right. And also the vote tabulation system triad had tampered with the counting machines, as I understand it, come in and done a little something to them, and also told those officials what the correct numbers for those precincts were supposed to be.
And the reason for that is that according to Ohio law, if after the first 3% of the votes in a county are counted by hand, if that sample matches the machine count, they can recount the other 97% of the votes for that county by machine. But if the 3% doesn't match the machine, then they have to count the rest of the county by hand.
And they didn't want to do that.
And even in cases where the two numbers didn't match, they still didn't count by hand.
And Kenneth Blackwell was in charge of all of this.
Right.
Again, he was co-chair of the Bush-Cheney campaign.
Right.
That's amazing. It's amazing.
And the numbers have all come out perfect. So, the press says, what are they asking about? The recount was done, the recount was done, the recount was done. Everything's fine. It comes out the same. Well, of course it comes out the same.
I think the press has really failed America.
Yeah, let's
on
talk
this
a little
one.
bit about the media. Why aren't we hearing about this? Why do we have to tune
Why,
in
we're on
to...
TV right now. What do you mean?
Well, there are millions of people watching this show, so they'll be enlightened. But what about the rest of the country?
Well,
I mean-
some of the stories come out. I mean, you eventually can find them. There'll be one in the Orlando Sentinel and another in something or other Free Press, some little underground newspaper. If you see it in something like the Mercury News or New York Times, it's maybe 3 column inches hidden on page 17.
And it's poo-pooed.
And they have even the headline, the tiny headline for it doesn't even correspond to what the information was that's in the story, and they don't tell half of it. And so they've just been dropping the ball as far as I'm concerned.
Now, why would they have an incentive not to report on these stories that sound to me like the news?
It should be.
I mean, some people say that because Kerry conceded the election the following day early, that everyone felt it's over, it's not going to make a difference, let's move on. Is that
You know, one of the things I've learned about this is that our legislators are just as ignorant as we are about how broken this system is. And so there has been, you know, as soon as first of all, there was a lot of momentum into the election saying, let's get it counted, let's find out who the winner is, let's do it right away. And it's like, I'm thinking, what's the hurry? What's the rush? Unless you have some plan about what you think the end is. Why rush to know everything if you haven't counted all the votes yet? And yet the story was already told as soon as that data smoothing happened with the exit polls and the actual vote tally. It was like the fix was in. The data got smoothed, and the next day we knew the winner, even though we didn't know who the winner was. The winner was claimed, and the press ran with it. Now, why?
Well, they feel they have to hurry up and wrap it up and move on to the next big story. But the other
But why?
The other thing, though, I think is that the people who don't want to have votes counted are very quick to say that when anybody raises a question about what goes on in an election, it's just a bunch of conspiracy theorists. And of course, nobody wants that. And you probably have reporters, honest reporters in papers and news stations trying to do a story on it.
But they're worried about the Dan
their
Rather
editors-
effect.
Yeah. It's don't be one of those conspiracy theorists, or how do you know that's true anyway? Don't bother us with that. We've got a better story, a hotter story. You know, this is, baby falls down well. This is a much more interesting story for the front
Scott
page.
Peterson trial, for God's sake. That was really important.
And so there goes democracy.
Well, it seems like the only investigative journalism happening now is independent media and the web blogs.
Yep,
Right.
That's it.
Right.
And a lot of that information seems very, very credible. And it's not refuted, but it's just ignored.
Well,
Right.
I think absolutely every one of our viewers better start finding out how to find things on the internet. And there you can have a lot of the things that come out in other independent media get picked up too and are on the internet, so you can go find them. And you have people who actually go and troll around and pull the stories together. For example, Bev Harris, who was on one of those news clips, she has a website, it's blackboxvoting.org, and has all these clips of things going on in the different elections in the different states. And all the time you can go find the most interesting sorts of things there.
Yeah. And also Mia Media has there have been lots of filmmakers out in Ohio and Florida and various other places who have been posting things on the web, and you can actually visually see what's going on in other places, and it's very disturbing. It's very disturbing.
One of the interesting things to me about this story is there really are investigations ongoing into what happened in the elections in Ohio, in Florida, in New Mexico, in Nevada, although the information really hasn't been released there, and there's court action on that, and in other states as well. But the investigations are not being done by the Democratic Party. There are recount requests and recounts being done by the Green Party and Libertarian Party in Ohio, and they have been trying to get that happening in New Mexico, and Ralph Nader got a recount done in New Hampshire. But the actual investigations of what's happening are really happening on a grassroots level by people who were volunteers with MoveOn.org or Election Protection Coalition or the Democratic Party who were observers during the election and who saw some of the things that went on, who had voters come to them and say, I tried to vote for Kerry and my vote jumped to Bush, or I should be on the voter rolls and my name's not there. All of those complaints, which our viewers can actually view themselves on the Election Protection Coalition website. Right. And I think we have that information about the link to that to show them. And I believe that the truth will come out about this election, and that the truth is that George Bush did not win this election. I believe that the theft of this election was much more significant even than the theft of the 2000 election. And I believe that that information will come out, but it doesn't look like it's going to come out in time to stop his inauguration.
Now, the House Judiciary Committee is going to be doing an investigation?
They are doing an investigation.
Doing one
it's
now, okay.
ongoing, yeah.
And that'll be finished sometime in June?
It's the Democratic staff of the House Judiciary Committee that's doing the investigation.
Right. It's not
the entire committee. And I don't know when it will be completed.
Well, also the Democratic National Committee on January 6th, the same day that the electors were voted to be accepted, said that they were going to spare no effort in investigating New Mexico and Ohio. And I don't know if we should trust them or not, because they didn't come out right away and say we're fighting for this election.
But wait, New Mexico, the governor just sort of said they have another election coming up. They're not going to bother to hang on to those machines. They're going to wipe them clean, even though they're supposed to be
impounded.
The evidence for a lawsuit.
I mean, our whole democracy is at stake here. It seems like everyone would be invested in making sure that we know if we vote, it's going to be counted, and the person who gets elected is the one who is chosen by the majority.
This is so important. We have all got to step up to the plate on this. I mean, this is not a situation where we can let our elected officials take charge, because they know less about it now than we do.
Yeah.
I think it's really scary for people to believe the kind of information we're talking about tonight, because the implications of it are so huge.
Yep.
If they can steal 2 elections in a row, how are we ever going to be able to trust another election? And it's a very real question.
Yep.
It's a very real question, and I think the risks are high. It means that we have to believe that maybe we really can't trust our government even more than we thought. Maybe it means that we have to be more involved than our comfortable lives would like to have us be. Right. But I just want to say that whatever the risk is of believing this information, the risk of not believing it is far greater.
Well, now, Emily, how did you get involved?
Let's see. I was a volunteer with the Election Protection Coalition in New Mexico during the election. And my impression was that I watched the election be stolen there. I worked for about 5 days there, about 14 hours a day, and I was really distressed by Kerry's quick concession. I was not a big Kerry supporter, but I did reluctantly vote for him. And what happened for me afterwards is I was really looking around for a way to get involved. And a friend heard Dr. Richard Hayes Phillips interviewed on Pacifica Radio and called me up and said, this guy's doing an interesting project, maybe you'd like to get involved. And I offered to help in a way that I thought was going to be maybe making a few phone calls, and ended up doing 50 hours a week of volunteer work for the last 6 weeks or so for his project, because I believe so strongly in what he's doing.
Thank you. We have another clip that I want to show, and this is of Jesse Jackson Jr. and talking about some of the problems and where we need to go from here. So let's go to that and we'll come back, because I'd like to hear your story too, Cheryl.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear. Today's objection is not about an individual, but our institutions. It's not about Republicans, but our republic. It's not about Democrats, but our democracy. It's about an election result. It's not about an election result, but about an election system that's broken and needs to be fixed. Today you're hearing the facts about voting irregularities in Ohio. In 2000, we saw a similar mess in Florida and other states. As we try to spread democracy to Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere, it is prudent, appropriate, and timely to examine our own democracy. What's wrong with our democracy? What's wrong with our voting system? State after state, year after year, why do we keep having these problems? The fundamental reason is this. Americans do not, Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order. Americans do not have the explicit right to vote in their Constitution. In 2000, the U.S. Supreme Court in Bush v. Gore ruled, and I quote, "The individual citizen has no federal constitutional right to vote for electors for President of the United States. So at present, voting in the United States is a state right, not a citizenship right. Hence, our voting system is built on the constitutional foundation of states' rights. 50 different states, 3,067 different counties, 13,000 different election jurisdictions, all separate, all unequal. Consider this. If you're an ex-felon in Illinois, you can register and vote. If you're an ex-felon in 11 states, mostly in the South, you're barred from voting for life. There are nearly 5 million ex-felons who paid their debt to society but are prohibited from ever voting again, including 1.5 million African-American males. But in Maine and Vermont, you can vote if you're a felon while you're in jail. Illinois, Florida, Vermont, different states, different rules, different systems. In contrast, the First Amendment to the Constitution guarantees us an individual citizenship right, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of association, and we can travel between the states with such a fundamental right. However, when it comes to voting, you do not have such a fundamental right. You have a state right. A state right is not a citizenship right, but a right defined and protected by each state and limited to each state. 108 of the 119 nations in the world that elect their public officials in some democratic manner have a right to vote in their constitution, including the Afghan constitution and the interim document in Iraq. The United States is one of 11 nations that does not have an affirmative right to vote in the Constitution. Shouldn't we be the 108th nation that does just that?
The House is not in order.
Good job,
Chip off the old block. So what that reminds me of is that really powerful scene in Fahrenheit 9/11 where the Congressional Black Caucus after Florida 2000 goes up one person after another and tries to contest the election, and not one senator stepped up to support them. And you need at least one senator and one representative in order to contest the election. Which brings up all the great work you did, Cheryl. Can you helped get Barbara Boxer to step up. She was the one senator, and that created some debate for a couple of hours, and at least people discussed the issue. Can you talk a little bit about how you got involved and what you and your team did to get Barbara Boxer on board?
Well, I want to talk a little bit about what happened to me when I was campaigning in Florida, because I had the same feeling you did, was that I was watching an election being stolen. I asked the election protection people, who is watching the counting of the votes after this happens, and it was like, well, it's getting taken care of somehow, but really no one was taking care of that. And when I walked into the headquarters on November 3rd and nobody was there, and the headquarters was a shambles, and the concession speech happened, and I realized, you know what? We went through all of this effort, and it was actually a betrayal that there was no challenge to how the votes were counted. That everyone in Florida knew that they had made an effort to try to get a paper trail, and they were prevented from doing it by the Republican Party. And yet there was a massive organizing effort to get people to go vote. What is wrong with this picture? And I came back to California and I said, I have got to do something about this. We cannot do this ever again. And I just thought, you know, I have no idea how to do this. I don't know how to go about doing it, but I have got to make sure that I don't feel this way. And I just started finding people of like mind and making appointments to go to the Congress people's office. We went to Nancy Pelosi's office, we went to Zoe Lofgren's office, we went to outside of Anna Eshoo's office, we went to Barbara Boxer's office twice. And I want to thank Barbara Boxer from the bottom of my heart for not making that scene repeat in Fahrenheit 9/11. I just really didn't want to see that again. And it was not my effort, but it was a lot of people's efforts, picking up the phone and calling. The people who were doing the lobbying on January 6th, who were in the halls of Congress, were saying, everyone's phone was ringing. Everyone's phone was ringing all day long. And, you know, I want to thank the people who I asked to help do this for doing that. All of us are responsible for having those scenes that we just saw on television happen.
What do you think were the arguments that convinced Barbara Boxer that she should stick her neck out?
I want to say something about that. Right before the congressional challenge happened, she and Stephanie Tubbs Jones did a press conference which was broadcast on C-SPAN. And she said in that press conference that in 2000, the reason that she didn't stand up is that Al Gore asked her not to.
Wow.
And that she regretted that decision, that it had been a mistake because it really wasn't about Al Gore, it was about the voters. Just like now, this time it's not about John Kerry, it's about the voters.
And Kerry wasn't even at the vote, right?
He was out of the country.
He's in Afghanistan.
Yeah, he was
conveniently absent.
Are there any, does anyone want to guess why Kerry didn't get more involved in this?
Well, about the challenge, I would venture a guess, and what I've read is that it was really a no-win situation for him to be there. The Republicans who spoke in the debate about the challenge, one after another, said, "This is sour grapes. This is sour grapes." Had Kerry been there and been the senator or one of the senators challenging, that would have really magnified that argument. If he had been there and hadn't challenged, what does that say?
Right.
And so, in some way, it was...
He did what he had to do.
He did what he had to do, and I think it made it clear that it really wasn't about him, that it's about fair elections.
Now, why didn't any other senators step up?
Other senators spoke in favor of the challenge during the 2-hour debate. It's what I've heard, and I can't confirm it, that a decision was made in coordination that that only Senator Boxer
They only needed one.
They
so-
only needed one, and they didn't want to expend more political capital than
and
necessary.
she just got elected to another 6-year term with quite a landslide. So
Yeah, I
maybe
mean, a
she-
bigger margin than, what, Bush?
Yeah.
But she also needed to hear from the voters.
Yeah,
I mean, so that the fact that thousands and thousands of people were barraging her with messages helped a lot. Because, you know, there aren't very many politicians who will stick their neck out if they don't think their constituents are going to be behind them.
You know, I think the fact that the press has been so complete in their blackout about this has really affected our legislators and what it is they know, because they only read what the mainstream media puts out, and it's very controlled now.
And it's not real. It's not a real issue to them.
It's not real. Yeah, it's not a real
You don't read it
issue.
in the New York Times.
Yeah, I mean, we were educating them about what was going on in Ohio. John Conyers lent credibility to the efforts that were already ongoing. The Conyers investigations were being offered evidence by the people who were already on the ground, the grassroots people doing the work. And I'm very thankful that he did it, but I don't think that the legislators have any clue of what is actually going on anymore, because they're in a very insulated bubble and it's all defined for them ahead of time, and they are eating the food.
And, you know, I hear that from bloggers who have occasion at times, you know, around specific issues to interact with the staff of members of Congress. And the members of Congress really don't know what's going on. A lot of the things that other people know. This is particularly a problem for Democrats, I believe, because Democrats don't have any kind of message infrastructure that really collects information and gets it into the hands of the staffers. I've gone and talked with a number of staffers in Congress, and they say, hey, we have a vote coming up within 24 hours. I don't have time to run around all over the place and try and figure out what's going on, because that's only one vote out of the 6 that we have to do by tomorrow. And so they really need to have that kind of help from outside to digest things and get it in their hands in ways that make sense for where they are in terms of the pressure of what goes on in Congress.
Well, and maybe this challenge to the electoral vote was something that woke them up a little bit. Maybe they're starting to pay attention. A little bit late,
Let's hope.
But maybe by 2006 we'll be prepared, which brings me to our last issue, which is where do we go from here? Now, in 2000, very, very close election nationwide, very, very close in Florida. Basically, it was decided by the Supreme Court on a 5-4 vote. The later counts showed that Gore, had all the votes been counted, Gore would have won and would have been our president for the last 4 years. 4 years later, in 2004, we had some of the same problems and we had some new problems. Where do we go from here? What can we do?
I think it's very important that people get involved. I think it's one of the things that we've seen is that it is the grassroots, it is the individual involvement right now that's causing the investigation to happen. And it's not, we need to be involved in election reform, but before we jump ahead to that, it's not time to let go of the 2004 election yet, because whether or not Bush takes office and whether or not he serves his whole term, it's important that we know who won. It's important that we know the magnitude of the fraud that occurred. And Nixon wasn't brought down in time to keep him from being reelected or inaugurated either, but within a year or so after he took office, he had to resign because of Watergate. And we may see history repeat in that way. And I think it's really important that people, it's easy to feel powerless. And the best thing that we can do about that is to take action. And as soon as you take action, as soon as you join with other people, whether it's in your local Democratic club or joining the Rainbow Push Coalition or getting online and checking out some of the websites that we've shown on the screen, as soon as you start linking up with other people who are doing work, you will see that it's a lot less hopeless than it looks.
Mm-hmm. And I think there should be consequences for criminal behavior.
Absolutely.
And the only way that's going to happen is if people are willing to investigate and make a lot of trouble for the people who are doing things that are wrong. And it's one of the reasons, too, that people should get involved in what goes on in their state and their county, as well as the national level, because you can influence what happens in terms of who's going to still be in office. And if there is somebody messing around with the elections or not doing an adequate job in your county, you better get them out of there. Mm-hmm. And you and your neighbors can do that, because it's at that scale.
Right.
Well, it sounds like we have our work cut out for us, but it's wonderful to know that there are such great leaders right here in our community. And we've given the viewers a lot of information on how they can get plugged in.
I want to give them some more.
A little more?
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
There's a document called Myth Breakers that was put out by Voters Unite. And this is a document that's been very useful to the people who are the county election supervisors, because it tells them what are the myths about these pieces of equipment that they are right now about to buy. Okay, right now is their purchasing time. So you need to look at those myth breakers and find out, is your county election supervisor about to buy a piece of equipment they ought not to be imposing on us?
That's going to be our final word. We have to wrap up. I want to thank Emily Levy and
Peter.
Cheryl Lilienstein and Kate Forrest. I want to thank the wonderful crew at the Media Center, and especially want to thank our producer, Nancy Brown, who's done a wonderful job pulling this together. So thank you for joining us for Fast Forward, and we hope to see you again.
Camera crew, too.
And Peter.
Yeah.